think Billy's... Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to the Chamber today. I'm the Deputy Chair of the Play, Recreation and Sport Committee, and I'm chairing the meeting today on behalf of Billy Meehan, who's the Chair, who's at home today. First off, I would like to explain that the meeting has been recorded and live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. The health and safety requirements for people in the Chamber, they will be displayed on the screen. Sorry, we're just going to change screens for a minute. While we're in the protection framework in the orange setting, we are asking everyone to continue to follow the public measures, and all online participants, please keep their cameras on and microphones muted unless addressing the meeting. Councillors in person, please select the option of voting devices if you wish to speak, but we'll just use the hand up function for voting. If you've got any amendments to any of the recommendations, please text them through or put them in the thing for the administrator, please. That would be great. So, and use the hand up function for alerting the administrator if you would like to speak. So, we know what the emergency procedures are, and so for those that are here from the public today, so we have got a few members of the public here today. It's nice to see you. Nice to be back in person, so nice to see you here. If we do have an emergency, we have got the emergency exits here, so you just go through the emergency exits and we will follow Rosa and Sarah, who will take us out calmly and coolly out into the downstairs area. So thank you for that. So we'll now move to the apologies for today. So the apologies are Councillor Bowen is a late arrival, and Councillor Dennison is missing in action, so I'm going to put him in as an apology. No, yours, not mine. So I will move those apologies, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. So we'll just go back to the screen again. Sorry for this, Rosa. Sorry for all these changes. If we can go back to the screen with all the faces on so that we can actually vote on the apologies. So if we can use with your hands up, we can vote on that, please. Thank you, everyone. If you can just raise your hands for that, thank you. And that's unanimous. That has passed. Now I'd just like to hand over to the Chair, Billy Meehan, who would like to say something. We can't hear you, Billy.
Well, it's a good idea if I turn that mic on. Thank you, Leonie. Look, I'd just like to, before we start Sports and Rec today, I want to acknowledge the tragic passing of Stephen Penn, team member of the Manawatu Mustangs. Our sympathy goes out to his wife, Vanessa, and family. And I'd ask that you all just stand with me for a minute's silence at this time. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate that. I'll pass back to you now, Leonie.
Thank you, Councillor Meehan. So we'll just go through to notification of additional items. I haven't been informed of any additional items, but we have got no declarations of interest, but we have got a public comment today. So we will look to you, Kerry, for your public comment. You have got 3 minutes, so we'll hand over to you, Kerry.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'd like to acknowledge Council staff for the shade audit report of our community parks and reserves that's being presented today. This report gives a clear, actionable process for shade planning It's good too to see the recognition of the importance of trees providing shade, reducing the impact of climate change, as well as the physical and mental well-being of green spaces in our community. However, it is concerning to see that under the current funding of the Parks and Reserves Shade Development budget, with 49 parks and 16 playgrounds requiring over 430 trees, that it will take 15 years before all parks and reserves are assessed as having plenty of shade. This highlights the need for this budget to be increased in the upcoming council budget discussions. So why do we need to do this? New Zealand has the highest death rate in the world for melanoma. Skin cancer is currently our most diagnosed cancer, and the estimated total cost to New Zealand last year was over $180 million for a cancer that is 90% preventable by our SunSmart behaviour and creating SunSmart environments where we live, work and play. This need was further reinforced by an Otago University national survey of parks and playgrounds, where only 40% of the playgrounds across New Zealand were found to presently provide adequate shade protection. Playgrounds in our more socio-economically deprived areas have less shade than those in less deprived areas. Environmental sun protection is particularly important in these lowest socio-economic status areas, as families on lower incomes can face economic barriers to improving personal sun protection. The researchers concluded that providing effective shade in playgrounds would help reduce children's risk of sunburn, skin cancer and heat stress, and increase playtimes, contributing to the goal of our community being an active community. So where to from here? The research I mentioned highlights the need to use an equity lens in decision making for planning of play spaces in our region. I ask that council staff prioritise shade and playground development in the higher deprivation areas of our community, and that you, the council, agree on an increased budget to make this possible for the sake of the well-being in our community. So thank you for your time today.
Perfect timing, Kerry, right on 3 minutes. Well done. I'll just open it up to see if anybody's got any questions of Kerry. Go back to the full screen. Deputy Mayor Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Kerry, and for your continuous work in this space. I think whenever this is on an agenda in terms of shade, we can always count on you to be advocating. Can I just ask, what would your ideal time frame be in terms of the rollout of particularly planting trees that would provide shade, understanding those would take some years to mature, but have you got an ideal time frame in mind in which this would be addressed?
I'd like to see this, the 15 years at least halved, which would mean doubling the budget. You know, and I'm hoping that would be reasonable.
Thank you.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Kerry, for this well-researched comments, public comment. My question is, do you think the trees are the only solution for shade, or are there any other ways that are acceptable according to your understanding?
Yes, we could also look at shade sails and built shade structures as well. The trees definitely have probably a much greater impact as far as climate change are concerned, and also we've got the problems of things like vandalism, and that shade sails don't have as long a lifespan as say what trees would provide.
Thank you, appreciate it. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Kerry. That's all the questions we've got for you today. So thank you very much for coming in to see us today with that great presentation, that great comment. So I'll look to move the comment today, seconded by Councillor Hancock. So we'll look to vote on that with a show of hands. So that's unanimous. Thank you, everyone. So we'll look to move to the next item, which is item number 5. We've got a presentation from Mark Evans, who's the race director for the Manawatu Tri Festival. Mark, would you like to come to the front? Now, Mark, you've got a PowerPoint presentation, and I think Sarah's going to flick that on for you. Now, Mark, you've got 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Just start when you're ready.
Right. My name's Mark Evans and I'm the event director for the Manawatu Triathlon League. I'm also involved in the Manawatu Triathlon Club. I might have to do it without the presentation, but that's okay. All right, there we are. First off, I'd like to say thanks for the opportunity to do this presentation today. Moment of truth, here we go. Back in 2020, the Manawatu Triathlon Club, we came up with this idea of offering an event for junior athletes that was based on the fact that that was the first year of COVID and all the junior athletes had so many events affected. We were starting to lose junior athletes from the sport because they had no goals in sight. So we managed to put this together at pretty short notice in 2020. We did it again in 2021 and we're building now into 2022. We've had some pretty special people come, so that was our first year of holding it, and that some of you might recognise that's Hayden Wild, who now has an Olympic bronze medal. So we've got a Facebook video embedded in this. It gives you a taste of our event at the CET Arena. So I'm not sure how I can.
Sarah, I might need your help.
You better click the video for me. So I'll just keep talking while we wait for the video. And in case this video doesn't, I can share the link to this video in case it doesn't work later on. But this event is the marquee event for our no, okay. That's fine. I'll just I can share the link for that later on. But this event is the Palmy Enduro, so this is our marquee event for our entire weekend, and it's completely encased within the footprint of the CET Arena. So by having it in the CET Arena, we don't have any traffic management required, we don't have any cars on the course, and if you're running in a triathlon event, cars are just the worst thing. You just can't have cars. So our plans for the 2022 event, so we've got 5 events planned, all within the Palmy city limits, except for one of them that I'll talk about later. So firstly, we have the Palmy Prologue, which is a run and bike event based at Manfield. We then have a swim event, the Aqua Race, which is based at the wakeboard park that is just out of Palmerston North towards Bunnythorpe. We then have our P-Naughty Invitational Road Mile, which is an elite road mile event, and that's based on Centennial Drive. And our next event is the Manawatu Mile, which is the mirror image event, and that's also based on Centennial Drive. And then the marquee event for our entire weekend is the Palmy Enduro, based at the CET Arena. So we were looking to grow in 2022 is, as far as the events go, our target demographic is the junior athletes. Along with junior athletes comes families. We're also we're working really hard to try and get the entire community involved in these events. For a mile event, that's for a mile run, everybody's capable of that. We're also trying really hard to get a high performance element involved in this event. And by ticking those top 3 boxes, I think that we expose the entire domestic triathlon community to benefits of what Palmerston North has to offer. As far as the athletes goes, we've been pretty lucky this year. We've managed to form an agreement with an Australian event, the Australian Grand Prix Triathlon, so they will be bringing Australian athletes over to race at this event in December. We're working with Triathlon New Zealand, so they will put this event on their high performance calendar. So we will have some of the athletes that will go to the Commonwealth Games. They will be here in December racing. I think we also get to tell the Palmerston North story. If you're an athlete, everything you need is in Palmerston North. There's nothing you don't need. A big criteria of events is they have to be safe and they have to be unique. And if we can get events like the CET Arena, where we can exclude cars, it's good for everybody. And once again, using our community inclusion. As far as the community goes, we really want to push that community participation, get our numbers up there, involved in some of our events. We really want to showcase that triathlon and multi-sport in New Zealand, and also showcase the facilities that Palmerston North has: Arapuki Mountain Bike Park, all the trail running, all the quiet country roads. There's everything you could need here. As working towards that, we do have some opportunities for co-branding, and these are some of the designs that the team at Capture Signs have come up with. So the top line there is fence panels that we have getting printed, and they will go on our finish shoot. We haven't decided on the final design for those yet, and the bottom ones will be the swim buoys that the athletes will use to turn around. So there is a lot of co-branding opportunities there. We're also working with a company called the Audio Visual People for live streaming of the event, and that's live streamed onto Sky Sport Next and YouTube. So that'll be very similar to what the elite events that were going on in the past month were doing as well. So the future, so this is some ideas that we, as a group, we came up for the future. We'd like to bring that Palmy Prologue, drag it from Manfield into the Palmy CBD somehow. More exposure, and it's just another unique event for the athletes. We're trying to have event growth annually. Our event growth has been about 60% increase in participants each year, which brings with it various other issues, because the more people, the more work. But that's one of the issues we have to work through. And also working with Triathlon New Zealand to have this as one of their key high-performance events for their high-performance athletes. So that's athletes that are attending the Commonwealth Games, have been to the Olympic Games, are going to the Olympic Games, and basically athletes racing on the international stage. Our event social media, this is our main way of engaging with our demographic, which is junior athletes. And so this is both on Instagram and Facebook, so we have a real concerted effort on regular posting and regular engagement on the social media for those. And then, so yes, I'd just like to thank everybody for the opportunity, and yeah, that's pretty much me. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. I'll just ask a couple of questions, and then we've got other questions coming. Yep. How many members have you got in your club?
At the moment, close to 200.
And what was the average age of your club?
Of the Manawatu Triathlon Club, about 27. Yeah.
Great.
Yep.
Councillor Petrinas.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for your presentation, Mark. Of interest, have you considered using the Massey Community Athletic Track? That's an Olympic quality track.
Yes, we have. We tried to get away from a track mile event because they held all over New Zealand. A road mile event aren't actually held that often in New Zealand. So that's why we moved to a road event, because it gives us a point of difference as opposed to a track mile event. Yeah.
The Mayor.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, well done on attracting some of those really high quality athletes here too. With an event like this, wouldn't be cheap to put on, I imagine. So, who are the sponsors?
We have a lot. So Central Bike Studio is Landmark Homes, Eurocar Suzuki, Moda 10 Mega, a shoe clinic in Palmerston North, Nick and the team at Shoe Clinic. Nick's managed to get On Running, which is a shoe brand, to sponsor us as well. And Tootkit is a company, a cycling clothing company that I've just bought. So we're going to sponsor one of the events as well.
Right.
So we're up to about close to $8,000 in sponsorship.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Mark. A couple of questions. You mentioned the Aqua race was just outside of Palmy. Is that held at the Wake Park in Foxton?
No, it used to be held at the Wake Park in Foxton, but Max has a wakeboard lake similar to that just outside of Palmerston North at Bunnythorpe.
Oh,
So if we
okay,
can
yeah, the
use
Bunny.
that will be a lot. It's the 30-minute drive down to Foxton was an issue for some of the athletes.
Yeah, okay. When you are talking about diversity and increasing that, are you talking about gender, age, ethnicity,
Yeah,
or all of the above?
Everybody, yeah.
Yeah.
We want everybody to come and do it, no matter who they are.
And are you currently seeing that, or is that still a working goal?
It's still a working goal. One of the things that we're seeing in the sport is under 19 females, that they're not there. So one of our goals for this event in specific is to have at least 12.
Okay.
12, female, under 19 females, because they're just doing other things.
Are schools on board with promoting it?
Yeah. So the promotions, and this is the way athletes work, the promotion's done mainly with the coaches, because if the coach writes it in the program, then the athlete does it.
Sure.
Yeah. So we have a coach information pack that starts going out next week to coaches nationwide, basically.
Okay. And so I guess with a focus on like a broad participation, particularly with age, and your comment that everyone can run a mile, have you invited the Mayor to participate?
Oh, we can do that. I'll do that, actually. Good idea.
Thank you. No further questions.
Just to follow up, do you work with Sport Manawatu with your pulling the
Yes,
trying to-
we have previously.
particularly with the young women, because I know they try to get young women too, and they're quite good at doing that, aren't
Yeah.
you, Brad? Yeah. Okay, thank you. There's no further questions, so thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, sorry about that. Councillor Barrett, you came into the queue quick.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Mark, for the overview. Could you just give us a little insight into kind of how the triathlon calendar works, maybe in the North Island at least, and perhaps in New Zealand, kind of how this is positioned to fit into that and hopefully synergize with that?
Yeah, so our dates for this year are the 16th to 18th of December. It's not just a stab in the dark, those dates. Basically, it's to tie in with the end of the school year. So a lot of the senior students, they've had 2 to 3 weeks off before they get to do this event. The triathlon season, so to speak, in the Southern Hemisphere runs from, it's basically summer, so it's basically October to March. So the 27th National Secondary Schools Triathlon is normally the 27th of March in New Plymouth, and that's the penultimate event of the season. Yeah, so this event is right in the middle of the season.
Great, thanks, Mark. Appreciate that, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Okay, we'll look to move this presentation. Councillor Meehan, you look to move it? Yeah.
Yes, I'll move that. Thank you, Councillor. Yes.
Great. And seconded by Councillor Hancock. Thank you. Is there any comment on this presentation? Thank you, the Mayor.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I'd just like to acknowledge Mark and his efforts with the Triathlon Manawatu. It's at a time, that event's at a time which we don't have a huge amount of events in the city, so it's timely. I attended the first one in 2020, and I was gobsmacked at the quality of athletes that were participating. So if all other councillors want to go in some sort of celebrity mile, I'm up for it. Thank you.
Great challenge there. Great challenge. Okay, I think, well, no other comments, we'll look to vote. So if you'd like to raise your hands if you're in favour. Thank you. Everyone's in favour. Thank you. Looking to the next item, which is the minutes on page 9. So I'll look to move the minutes, seconded by Councillor Hancock. There's one abstention from the Deputy Mayor. But we'll look to vote on the minutes, please. A show of hands. Are you against? Okay, an abstention from Councillor Beattie. Thank you. So there's 2 abstentions with everybody else in favour. Thank you. It's quite hard to keep your eye on the room.
There was 3 abstentions.
Oh, sorry, that's Councillor Finlay's also an abstention. Right, we're up to the next report, which is item number 7, which has been presented by Julie McDonald. Welcome, Julie. It's page 13, everyone. Julie, over to you.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou. This report is for your information only. The RSFP assessment will primarily benefit gym sports at this stage as they continue to develop their proposal for a regional gymnastics facility that you heard all about at a previous committee meeting. Happy to answer questions, as is Anne-Marie, who's on hand to do that.
So just to be very clear, it's just for information only. You've been having very good discussions with Sport Manawatu and gym sports, so there's no recommendation in this report at this stage, just so that everyone's quite clear on that. So any questions for Julie? Oh, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Julie, for the report. My questions around process and around where in the process we look at options and potential synergies around a facility, the core of which that facility might be gym sport. The example I'll give is around a sport climbing gym. It's another gap in terms of what the community actually has on offer, and some potential crossover, in my view at least, around the sorts of clients and activities that you might see in a gym sport facility. So could I just understand where in the process there's kind of a broader look at what opportunities the community might want to realize through this sort of facility?
Sure, I'll start to answer that, and then I think I might ask Emery for some more comment. I do know that Gym Sports have been in communication with the climbing facility proposal people, who I think may also come to this committee at some stage soon, talk about that. I mean, I guess that at this stage, the proposal is obviously belonging to Manawatu Gym Sports. It's their proposal for them to develop as they see fit. What this does is joins up the Gym Sports proposal with the process that Council has agreed to take through any major undertaking like this one in terms of decision making. So I guess at the point at which Manawatu Gym Sports want to ask something specific of Council, then this is the process that informs that decision making. But I might ask Emery for some more detailed comment about process.
Kia ora koutou.
Welcome.
Yeah, as Julie said, both the Gym Sports proponents and the climbing wall proponents, and which has kind of been expanded into a bit more of a alternative movement facility concept, which is something a little bit different, but is broader than just climbing sports, have both been talking. And it would be something that is raised in the next phase of work, which is the preliminary feasibility assessment, when there's a consideration of opportunities and options in terms of, you know, the form of that facility and the partnerships.
Thank you, Emery, and thanks, Julie. So at that stage, does it move to sort of a, I guess, a stakeholder engagement type thing where it, you know, sort of formally seeks input from council and other organizations about what they see might be useful to bring into an integrated concept, or is it kind of just an ad hoc sort of thing?
Thank you, Councillor. No, I don't think it would be an ad hoc thing. I think there would be, as part of that next phase of work, some stakeholder engagement, as you mentioned, and some of those parties there'd be more, I suppose, deep and meaningful conversations about the synergies between those two proposals that we know about at this stage and how it may fit within a broader context. So yeah, no, I think that definitely there would be some, you know, quite targeted one-on-one conversations with those parties.
Great, thank you. And just to finally clarify, then that would reach beyond just the example which I happen to give of the sports climbing and gym sports. Like it would be a kind of 360 look around. Is there anything else that should be integrated?
Thank you. Julie's just drawn my attention to the part in the report that looks at a number of other bits of work that are going on. So one would be the upcoming review of the Arena Master Plan work, and definitely Manawatu Gym Sports have indicated Arena as a potential site for a gymnastics facility. So within the context of provision for outdoor sport, which is another piece of work that is planned for the future. And we are starting to look at that, I suppose, in some respects through the review of the Palmerston North parts of the Regional Sports Facility Plan. So there are kind of a number of things sort of happening about the same time. I mean, the timing is a little bit unknown as to when the further feasibility work may commence for the gym sports concept, given uncertain funding, I suppose, and the readiness of the group to, you know, proceed into that stage of work. So yeah, there are a number of things happening at the same time which would have an impact on, or would be, I suppose, expanded in that next phase of feasibility work.
Great, thank you both. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Julie. Julie, in the facilities outline report, it's got the indicative costs, and it's got 2017 costs, which are like 5 years out of date, and you're looking at sort of 3.5 to 5.7 million. So has there been any updated, and I mean with funding being uncertain, if we're looking like those costs are now obviously way out of kilter. So will these be, how are we?
Yeah, excuse me, those costs are outdated and were included within the National Sports Organisation Gymnastics Facilities Strategy. They would need to be re-looked at, there's no doubt about that. We're all aware of increasing costs, so yeah, it would be something that would be teased out in that next phase of work, what the actual cost for such a facility would be. I'm just going to turn to Brad. I'm not sure whether Gym Sports have provided him any further information on whether they've had those figures checked for, you know, latest construction costs and, yeah, so it would be definitely something looked at in the next phase.
If I can just add, rather than getting into too much detail about actual dollars, I think what this report sets out is that in the next stage there'd be a whole lot more detail which would include accurate updated costs before it got to much more of a detailed proposal.
Yep, okay, thank you.
So just, thank you, Councillor. Next question from me is, what's your next step with this program?
The next step isn't really for us. The next step really is for the proponent group, which is Manawatu Gym Sports, to work out how they're going to undertake that piece of work, which has, you know, the approval of the steering group that has looked at their facility concept outline. So we're there to support Gym Sports along with Sport Manawatu to help them further the work, but it is somewhat dependent on how that work is funded.
So they're online, so they know all of this, that they know that that's the next step for them, is to do that next bit of work, and then they'll come back to us. Is that what the...
Yes, if they need to, or they'll come back through the steering group.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, that's all the questions. Thank you so much. So I will move the recommendation that the committee receive the Regional Sports Facility Plan Steering Group's report on the assessment of the Manawatu Gym Sport Facility concept outline for a regional gymnastics facility in Palmerston North, presented to the Play, Rec and Sport Committee on the 27th of April 2022 and seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Thank you. I'd just like to say thank you very much to the officers for the work that they've done to date, and also that they have worked really well with Sport Manawatu and with Manawatu Gym Sport, which is what was asked of them. So really appreciate that cooperative approach that has been done to date, because that's what we asked them to do. So I think that has been shown really well in this report, and really appreciate that effort and that combined effort. So I will say that. Is there any other comments? No? Okay, we'll look to vote. Looks like we're unanimous, thank you. Okay, we'll go to item number 8. I feel like we've just done that.
It's the options for council land.
Okay. Okay, Kathy. Page 33.
So, councillors, this report relates to item 7, but it was a separate resolution of council that the officers came back with a list of identified land options. The report has been very closely linked and worked in with Gym Sports, and they have been involved in the process. When looking at land options, we have looked at all land owned by council, not just those within the parks and reserves portfolio, and I'm here to answer any questions you may have on the report.
Thank you, Kathy. Opening it up for questions. Councillor Meehan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to know, Kathy, did Gym Sports give a clear indication of the options that were put up, the land that was looked at, a really clear one of those options they preferred? from reading the report, I can't see a really clear option at all.
No, and the reason for that is there's not enough information with those options on how successful they would be in terms of establishing the facility, given resource consenting issues and other land associated issues. Some of the sites are already occupied by other sports. The only preference indicated at this stage was that was preferred for the northeastern area of the city.
So as gym sports proceed further, these land options will also be proceeded further. Is that right?
No, that's not our recommendation. What needs to happen is that the land options that were asked to be, Council asked in its resolution that we look at land options of council-owned land. As indicated in the report, there is land that we currently don't own, in other words, land in the urban growth areas, land in the industrial areas, and land owned by others. And as officers, we would recommend that when you're looking at site locations, you consider all options and don't constrain yourself to just council-owned land.
Okay, thank you.
The Mayor.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Kathy. I know that, and this may be slightly off track a little bit, but in terms of the question, I know it's all about land. But did they look at, rather than the design and build, land design build, have they looked at a lease or another party building something for them?
That's not a question I can answer because this report only looked at the land options, and through the chair, whether you would like Julie to perhaps answer that question.
Sorry. The answer to that question is really we can't answer that question. It's one for gym sports to answer as they get their proposal further along. It's not really up to that stage yet in terms of the proposal, I think. I don't really want to speak on their behalf.
Okay, I'll leave it to comment. Thank you.
Councillor Petrinas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kathy, I'm just looking at page 61 and I'm wondering why the Bunnythorpe Recreation Ground has got a sunburnt colour behind it.
What page are you on?
Sorry, your page reference again?
Page 61?
Page 61 is on item 9, not item 8.
I think you're on item 9.
Oh, okay.
That's all right. That's all right, we're on the right report now. Okay, there's no further, is any other questions online? No, we've finished all the questions. Thank you, Kathy. Okay. The recommendations. Okay, moved by Deputy Mayor Rutherford and seconded by Councillor Meehan. That the council note that the identified council land options for Manawatu Gym Sport regional facilities and that the council include a list identified council land options in any future decision-making process for Manawatu Gym Sport regional facilities proposal. So you've got those. Great, I've said that there. I'll open up for comment, the Mayor.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Look, I thank the officers for getting us down this pathway. It's quite difficult at times because it's like a sieve, or funnel, sorry. You're funneling everything down into some sort of end point. But I think Councillor Beattie summed it up in the last report. The numbers are pretty challenging. You know, we're probably talking $6 to $7 million worth for a building. But this club is significant, you know. They are very successful. They're the fourth biggest gym sports entity in the country, and they seem to be grabbing a sector of demographic which is really important to the city. I really do think if you looked at this a few years ago or even a decade ago, you would say something like Arena would be worthwhile exploring and focusing on more. The page 46, which shows the Arena map and the strengths and weaknesses and what they need, is we've seen stock cars years ago with the Callaghill Hall. That was their club rooms, which was an owned building which they had on council land. Obviously Marist are the same, but this may be an option where council could do something and have a very long-term lease which recouped the cost of council's investment. And it would suit a lot of, you know, it would be utilised car parks, which they're going to have to go and pay for some car parks. We've got car parks that are unutilised sometimes during the day. It would be quite beneficial. I suppose the only thing is they do want the facility as their own, but I suppose they would have to pay for it in that sense. It's going to be really hard for them to build this by themselves. They seem very well organised, so that's one real positive for the organisation. But look, the report, thank you for the report. I mean, it gets us closer to what's going to be a pretty tough decision for the organisation, for some advice from officers and us as elected members. But at least we've got people that have got enthusiasm and wanting to do things, which is really positive. Thank you.
Councillor Meehan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to echo what the Mayor has just said, you know. Thank the officers for this report. It gives us an option, lets us see what's out there, and we know that gym sports are going to need help to get the rest of the way. I'd just like to add, I spoke to Kim Finn from Manawatu Gym Sports a couple of days ago, and she wanted me to publicly commend Aaron Phillips and Anne-Marie for their help this far. And so I'd just like to thank the officers and myself as well for the work they've done. And gym sports are very responsible what's going on, and are really supportive of the help council are giving them. Another one they mentioned was Brad Cassidy from Sport Manawatu. So to all those people, thank you very much.
Right. With that, we've got no further comments, so we'll look to vote on these recommendations. Thank you. Raising your hands. All those in favour? Thank you, everyone. Thank you. That's passed unanimously. Good. We'll look to move to item number 9, which is the one that Kerry's been waiting for, which is the results of the 2022 audit of shade provision parks. It's on page 55. Bruno, this is the one I think you were looking at? Yeah. Okay. Right. Back to you, Kathy.
Thank you, councillors. It's nice to have the opportunity to present this report, in particular because it doesn't relate to a particular park or a particular piece of land, but to the network of parks as a whole. And the shade report, or the audit of the shade provision in parks, follows on from an action within your sun protection policy. And just reminding council that one of the ways in which council has resolved in that policy to help minimise the incidence of excessive and harmful patterns of ultraviolet exposure is through establishing shade trees in parks and reserves, and especially where children's play areas have been provided. The process that we went through in the methodology, we did a trial of the methodology last year, and in January earlier this year we went through and used a very simple process so that it could be relatively readily repeated. And that process really assesses whether there's plenty of shade, some shade or no shade in the park as a whole and associated with the playgrounds. As you can see, we have a number of parks and covered in attachment 1 that have don't currently have plenty of shade, but have some shade trees that have been planted and are growing. And those shade trees are as a result of the program for funding for the shade provision in parks. And that is an ongoing program, and that program is supported through the planting of trees and the care and watering of those trees in the early year to allow them to establish. As has been highlighted in the public comment, whilst there is natural shading in the parks and that is growing, the audit has identified that it will be some time at the current level of planting provision before we will have achieved plenty of shade on all of our parks and across all of our playgrounds. In looking at the parks, we have developed the priority for planting based on the shade category. so whether it's a playground, a sports field or another park, and with a prioritisation on those areas, in particular playgrounds that have no shade and no trees planted at present, and working on through to areas that already have some shade but perhaps not adequate shade, and therefore not planting trees in parks that already have plenty of shade. And that's, it's a logical progression through. We have not looked at this from the point of view of what areas of the city those parks are located in. We have done a pure assessment of the level of shade within those areas. Within the current shade provision, however, having said that, we have had a focus in the last year on sports fields and on our suburb reserves. That really is quite a deliberate focus to make sure that within each suburb there is the provision of a park that can be used by that local neighbourhood where shade is provided. And an example of that would be the work that we just did at the Awapuni Park, where we put artificial shade over the enclosed playground area. So that is our first priority, and with particular focus on the fact that on our sports fields we noticed that there wasn't shade for those who were spectating at the sports, and so there has been a focus around that. So happy to take any questions on the report.
We've got a number. We'll start with you, Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Kathy. Couple of questions. I see that programme 1099 has got a budget of 31,000 per year. So is the 21,000 that isn't spent on trees, is that spent on the artificial shade each year?
Yes, it is. And there's 2 years in the current LTP that there is provision for artificial shade, and thereafter the program drops down to 10,000 per annum. The artificial shade, councillors, in terms of, and it's covered in the report, the priority in your policy is the planting of trees, but we have some areas in which artificial shade is appropriate, noting that artificial shade is obviously not the most sustainable option for providing shade in parks.
So, given the results of the audit and the time frame for reaching our desired level of shade is quite far into the distance, if we were wanting to make that happen quicker, is it simply a matter of increasing the budget, or is there some other barrier to doing this?
I'm pleased to say that in this case that is actually an option for councillors, is to increase and accelerate it. We are blessed with one of the largest and best tree nurseries in New Zealand, located right here in Palmerston North. There's an adequate supply of trees. We have an adequate supply through our in-house workforce to be able to plant those trees and to be able to care for those trees if council was to increase the budget.
So if we were to increase the budget by 10,000 a year, is it a simple linear relationship that doubling the budget would then halve the time?
Somewhat. So we've got the time of planting and 5 years of growing. So whatever we do, if we were to plant all the trees next year, we would still be 6 years because we'd have those 5 years of growing before we had that plenty of shade.
Okay, all right. Thank you. I think that's all for now.
Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and Councillor Johnson has actually asked most of my questions. Really, I was just sort of concerned, I guess, around sort of the pace of being able to get these trees and being effective shade. But the report actually also talks about a rate of loss, either by theft or by damage. Do we have a feel for what that is per annum and what impact that has on our program?
No, because some of the loss is due to theft and vandalism, and some is due to climatic conditions. And so we've been working quite hard with our watering program and our care program to reduce the loss through weather. But obviously, the cyclone that came through the city did extensive damage to trees, and we can't really allow for those types of events. The vandalism of trees often occurs in areas where there isn't a real ownership of what is happening. So I think good communication, good promotion that the tree planting is about shade and the wider benefits would help to reduce that.
Yeah, great, thank you. And that kind of leads me on to the next part of the question, which is really You know, in those areas where vandalism might in fact actually be more prevalent, is there a process that we actually follow for engaging with the community and actually getting the community to own the tree planting in a sense?
Yeah, it's very interesting because the vandalism is not in particular areas of the city. It is really quite widespread. Vandalism of trees can occur in areas where really a single person can go along in one day and snap the tops out of trees, and you might not have had for years any other vandalism there. So it doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily engaged with the local community. We have had examples in the past where we have worked in areas with the local community, but where that community is transient, then obviously we get some loss of trees later where the people who once were caring for them are no longer caring for them. So it's a little bit of a difficult one. I think probably the better approach would be a city-wide approach, perhaps working with wider groups rather than areas of location to say trees as a whole, and linking that into our climate change initiatives.
Would it be fair to say, though, perhaps neighbourhood reserves might be more open, perhaps, to you know, a formal approach from council in terms of supporting the program?
Yes, potentially in some neighbourhood areas, but our neighbourhoods are changing, and so not all our neighbourhood reserves are equal. We've got a large number of neighbourhood reserves, and in some areas that would work, and in other areas there's probably little ownership of the neighbourhood reserve.
Thanks, Kathy. Cheers.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Kathy. I had some questions around Program 1099 as well. At the bottom of page 55, it talks about council's policy being to provide natural shading, and then gives the rationale in terms of the environmental preference for trees over shade cloth. In the LTP, I think there was 3 years of 30,000 this year, 31 for year 2 and 3, with the higher amount. Is there scope for officers to utilise that more of that larger budget for trees, or are you somehow, the way you answered Councillor Johnson's question, I'm not sure, it sort of implied that just 10 was for trees and 20 was for something else, but I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on whether or not the full 30 can be actually used for trees, given the policy direction that's outlined here.
I would have to take that back to my staff, but my understanding is that the majority of last year's artificial shade money was spent at the Esplanade, so existing shade. So we have some programs of replacing and renewing existing artificial shade, as well as the situation we had in Awapuni where we put up new shade. My understanding is that next year's program could be one or other of those that could be a replacement of some existing shade. So I'd have to check that.
Okay, so that program 1099 is a capital new program. I'm assuming there is other renewal programs that maintain shade areas. Would that be correct, or?
Yes, so what would normally happen with the replacement of a shade sail, that would be a renewal item. But what has happened in some cases is where we've had to replace existing shade with a new shade structure. And so the structural elements of that would be capital new, because it's an increase or enhanced level of service.
Okay. Yep, I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Kathy. Some of my questions have already been asked, but just following on from Councillor Naylor's question, is there, I guess, flexibility with the budget that if you have 1 year where, say, 17,000 was used for artificial, that the remainder of the budget would just automatically go to planting trees, or is there quite clear division within the budget that a portion is specifically for artificial and a portion for trees?
No, we have that flexibility within the budget. It is for shading in parks. We entirely have the option not to do any more artificial shading next year and spend all of the money trees. I would just have to check whether there's any expectations from any community groups or any asset management reasons that would cause a reduction in level of service in a park that we weren't replacing or putting a new artificial shade.
Okay. Would you think that there is a risk of moving away from putting in artificial shade in the meantime, considering that there is some time before trees actually do the job we want them to do?
There is a risk. There's a risk in terms of where we have parks where there is no shade provided, and we have a playground, for example. But most of our parks have some shade and have some trees. If the council was to put up a lot of artificial shade or plant a lot of trees, it is still up to the participants to utilise that shade. So we can never change that behaviour. I think a greater risk for council is if we were to go along and continue to capture carbon by using artificial products and steel and other manufacturing things, and create a rates impact of replacing that artificial shade in the long term than actually carrying on with our more sustainable approach to planting trees.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer. Just in terms of the projection of 10 years before we would address the shortfall of shade, so we can assume that $100,000 then would be sufficient based on $10,000 per year in the budget. If there was an additional budget of $10,000, $100,000, that would address that provision of planting.
Yes. So what you've got at the moment, councillors, is you've got 10,000 in years 4 through to 10 already provided for in the LTP. If that was to be brought forward, in effect, because it's not necessarily additional funding, then that would accelerate the pace at which that program can be completed.
And can you give me an idea of, you've made a comment in response to somebody's question around capacity and the fact that we actually have local growers and we have got people who can do the planting, but what would your comment be around the capacity in terms of the time frame to have that work complete in the current environment? Do you think, if funding wasn't a barrier, do you think that's a piece of work that could be undertaken within a year, 6 months, 3 years? What sort of time frame would you?
Thank you so much for asking me that question. We believe we could increase it by fourfold, so 40,000 in a year. And the reason for that is that we have a staff member at the moment that spends a day a week watering the trees over the summer months. So if we were to increase that to 4 days a week watering, that's probably where we would start to hit capacity, is actually that aftercare of the trees once planted.
Okay. And then just my final question is, are there any other questions you would like elected members to specifically ask you on this matter?
No, there are not, but thank you for asking.
I've got other councillors in the queue. Councillor Petrinas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My apologies for excitement previously. Kathy, I'm interested with the actual attachment 1 on page 61 for Bunnythorpe Recreation Ground and why the background is coloured in red.
So the background is coloured in red there because there isn't a playground there at that reserve, and so you'll notice in terms of the priorities, as you come down that list, all the rest have a playground. But that one has been identified as one early on where we said that there isn't any shade at that site, there isn't a playground, but we considered it a priority for planting. We would have gone ahead with the planting in this current year, but we're still, because the building itself was delayed, we're still working through with the local community on the priority for that. But we believed that given that site and given the significance to that community, it is functioning somewhat as a suburb reserve, even though it doesn't have a playground.
When the audit was done for Bunnythorpe Recreation Ground, did somebody just check the direction of the sun? Because at the Anzac Day ceremony the other day, there was over 200 people there and they were all bathed in sunlight. And even when I looked as to where trees might be planted, the actual shadows seemed to run parallel to the rugby pitch.
Yeah, so I guess it's really in a situation like that, and which is why we want to engage with the community. It's about what we shade at a park. So obviously you can't cover a whole park in shade, and it's really whether the priority is now with the building located, there in and around the building. Are activities going to be occurring in and around the building? Is it associated with the players at the grounds? And so that's some of the conversations we need to have.
Right. My second question, Madam Chair, is what audit was done of Arena Manawatu terraces?
We didn't do an audit of Arena Manawatu.
So I was just looking at perhaps some pressure went on for the actual roofing over the terraces somewhere along the line that would sort of help the people that are watching rugby there in the sunshine.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Right, we've got two more councillors for questions. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Kathy, for the report. Quite a bit of the territory that I was interested in has been canvassed by others in terms of making things go faster. But one of the questions I had in that regard was around kind of tree size selection and how you get sort of the 5 years, and is there a size of tree that could get us there in 3 years or some other time frame? I'm not necessarily thinking the scale of transplanting that we tried with the arena and the palm trees, but could we go with bigger trees and get there sooner?
No, the chances are that we'd have a higher rate of loss. So we really have to hit that sweet spot between the size of the tree and its ability to adapt to the climate, and having that larger tree. And certainly once you get to a larger tree, they're much harder to manipulate. We can normally, with 2 people, lift in the tree size that we are currently planting. We'd probably be looking at a HIAB or other machinery. Therefore, your budget would be eaten up faster on less trees.
Cool, thank you. Also wanted to ask around, I suppose, the future outlook. It boggles me that we've got all these gaps that we have to close up after developments have been done. So in terms of future developments, is it sort of built into consenting and district planning that as a matter of right, all new reserves get shade trees from day one, or is this something that we're constantly having to address case by case?
No, the staff have done an excellent effort in terms of the development of the asset management plan and feeding into the development contributions policy to ensure that development contributions cover not only the acquisition of the reserve but the development of that reserve. So this is not an issue for new reserves going forward. The development of reserves is in the total control of council, so we have ensured that we have got the adequate plantings associated with the playgrounds and pathways as they go in.
Right, thank you. That's fantastic to hear. Back to you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, last questions from Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just wanted to signal an additional recommendation, which I'm just working on. I can't see very well from here, but is the Administrator Rosa today to send
Yes,
it to?
it is.
Okay, I've sent one through, which I'll just rescind, and in light of some of the questions, and I'm just typing up another one to go through now.
Okay, thank you. Right, thank you for that. That's all the questions, which is very good today. Thank you, Kathy, for answering all those questions. You did very well. So at this moment, I will move the first recommendation, which is that the committee receive the memorandum titled Results of the 2022 Audit of Shade Provision and Parks presented to the Place, Recreation and Sport Committee on the 27th of April 2022, seconded by Councillor Hancock. And the next recommendation is from Councillor Johnson, which we're still waiting for.
Would you like me to read it out before I send it?
Yeah, thank you.
That funding for programme 1099 be brought forward from years 4 to 10 to a maximum of 40,000 each year for tree planting, and that be referred to the annual budget deliberations. I'm just working on the wording, but basically the upshot of the recommendation is that I would like this to be considered in the annual budget deliberations, and what I would like us to consider is bringing forward the funding that we have in the 10-year plan in the outer years into the next 2 to 3 years to enable the planting to go at a faster rate. And I think the Deputy Mayor has indicated that she would be supportive in seconding that.
Thank you. We'll just get this wording sorted. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Johnson, do you want to speak to that first?
Yes, I just think that obviously right now isn't the moment, I don't think, to decide to bring the funding forward, because it's got to compete with other things in the annual budget. So that's why I'm suggesting that it's just a signal that at this stage we take this concept through to the annual budget deliberations. But I'm very supportive of us moving at a faster rate to provide shade. And when you think about it, I mean, 15 years is the time it takes a child to grow. And if that child has to wait its whole childhood to be given protection from shade, from sun in form of shade in parks, then I think that we're not really moving at a fast enough pace. And I think, you know, Kerry made some very compelling remarks about the fact that melanoma is 90% preventable, and we have the highest death rate in the world from melanoma. And so it's not a huge budget, it's money that's in the budget already, and it's more a question of prioritising this as an action that we can take in a public health kind of sphere. And I think, you know, Kathy made it quite clear that the capacity for planting is there, up to planting of around $40,000 a year, and so that's why I've taken that as the limit for each year. So all I'm really asking for at this stage is support for the concept of moving this money into the next 2 to 3 years, be discussed at the annual budget. Thanks.
Okay, we're just putting it up on the screen now, and the Deputy Mayor, did you want to speak to it as well?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I agree with...
Sorry to interrupt. That's not the right one. I've just that was the first one that I put through, but I changed it. So there's a second one come through just now. That's not the correct one. Sorry, that's on the screen.
Sorry, it's just quite hard to work with you being off. So have we got the right one then?
The one that's on the screen is not the correct one.
Well,
I've sent one which is, as I outlined, that the funding for tree planting in programme 1099 be brought forward from years 4 to 10. That's it, to a maximum of 40,000 a year, and that this be referred to the annual budget deliberation.
Okay, good. Right, now, Deputy Mayor, would you like to speak to it now as well?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I think that the report presented puts forward quite a compelling argument, and I do actually agree that we have a obligation to support the health and well-being of our community by ensuring that there is adequate sun protection in our parks and reserves. The time it takes for us to reach that in terms of tree planting is not, in my view, it's actually not good enough for it to take 10 years to be able to plant, and then a further 5 years for us to reach the point in which it's the trees are actually providing adequate shade. So I do support us having a conversation around bringing that forward. I think what's proposed is the best option in terms of the process. I would have been happy to just increase the budget right now, but I do think that the conversations that we are having with our community around a range of topics at the moment, centring around affordability and prioritisation. Prioritisation is, I think, our buzzword at the moment. And so I do think the most appropriate way forward is actually to include this in our deliberations with the annual budget. I think that without this resolution, if there are no submissions that talk around shade protection, we don't really have good grounds to advance changes within the budget in this space, especially if we're bringing money forward. So I do think that we need this recommendation to be able to include that in the conversation we have coming up around at what our final annual budget looks like moving forward. And because it's also got implications to the long-term plan as a whole, I think that's the most appropriate place to have the conversation. But yeah, fully in support of us doing something. And I guess as well, you know, we've heard particularly in the finance meeting earlier today around our limitations to actually get work done in particular spaces across the organisation. We've heard quite clearly that this is not an area where we have a limitation. And so I think that while we have the opportunity to progress work, we should advance it as much as possible, because we don't know when we may be restricted in this area. So yeah, really happy to progress that.
Okay, have we got any other speakers for or against this motion? No, all silent on that. Okay, well, we'll look to vote. Are we happy to bring them in together? Anybody want them separately? No? Okay, we'll vote for them together. Rosa, can we have them up together then, please? Here we go. So they've been read out, so I don't need to read them again. So we'll look to vote. So all those in favour, can we raise our hands? We'll just go back to the screen. Great, that's unanimous. Well done, Kerry. Okay, we'll move on to our item number 10. Thank you, Sport Manawatu, for waiting for the length of the day. Okay, we've got Julie and Brad coming forward. Over to the two of you.
Kia ora koutou. Happy to present the 6-month report from Sport Manawatu along with Brad. I just note that Sport Manawatu did come and do a pretty detailed presentation to this committee a few months ago, so this updates that. I think Brad's going to take you through a presentation.
Kia ora, ngā mihi ki a koutou. Thanks for the opportunity to present our report. I suppose it was a great opportunity to reflect on not just the 6-month period from July to December 21, but actually the 2.5 years prior. Obviously the purpose to that was outlined, or I believe, in the officer report to provide some context around potential changes in our strategic partnership agreement that we've been working on. The intention, of course, to have that presented to elected members and for it to be in place, ready to rock and roll by 1st of June. A couple of highlights, as Julie had outlined. We presented a state of play report, I think, in March, and that was really a live summary of the sector, some anticipated challenges with factoring in COVID. Apologies, all said and done. there's still plenty of opportunities around our mahi. So just a good chance to share what the team have been working on. As was highlighted within your reports, I'm not sure on what page it is, the Active Communities Fund. Just wanted to do a big shout out for this council for actually having that accessible to our residents, and particularly those that have financial challenges or barriers. We find that's been extremely valuable, and the fact that during the 10-year plan deliberations you supported a further 10-year investment within that, we're most grateful, and it's really good to be part of those success stories along the way. The workplace challenge, again, as outlined within your document, it's a really good opportunity for us to consider how we promote physical activity for those over 18. I'd pick up on the comment that the Deputy Mayor touched on before about the challenges for elected members to go out, be seen, being active. So I'm really looking forward to the Mayor putting on his lycra and entering that try event. All that said and done, the code safety plans, it was a concerted effort on council, Sport 102 and our codes to make sure that we could resume or our return to play for our community on council venues and facilities. A big shout out to the codes who did an amazing job through what was an extremely challenging period. It felt like the spotlight was on our sector more than potentially others, but that's not to detract from what punishment the other sectors went through, particularly business. But for our codes that were able to spend a lot of time and energy developing safety plans to present back through our team and Victor. I just want to thank Victor behind me, who was an integral part of the process to make sure that people could get back into competitive activities. And to be fair, now back in Orange, it feels like a little bit of a distant memory other than having COVID myself. Moving on, our Walk and Wheels Week, again, a really good opportunity to showcase the advantages of trying to get to and from work, to and from school, to and from around town on Walk and Wheels. And obviously we want to continue to promote the active transport component that's highlighted. Also within the Bike Ready component, you'll see there's quite a bit of feedback from the children that we've engaged over that 2.5 years. We know that the Bike Ready program works. We know that kids feel confident thereafter, but sometimes we can only take it so far if potentially infrastructure or, more importantly, maybe driver behaviours is an inhibitor to getting those kids on bikes and on our roads. That said, we've got some fantastic recreational assets around the city, and we don't need to look too far. Weekends where our community are reaping the rewards of council's investment into those assets. Our pop-up plays, again, really good chance and opportunities to engage with our community, understand or get the sense check around their value of play, how often they get out of their own hoods. A bit of a story behind this picture. We wanted to put this wheelie bin in Te Marae o Hine. We were worried about the bin, so we locked it to a pole. We shouldn't have worried about the bin because the rest of the kit went missing. That said, I'd like to think that whoever's taken that stuff, they're using it at home, so good on them. Last but not least is really around our event environment. It has been challenging, as you can see through the figures from the first 2 years, significant economic benefit for our city, but then, we took a major hit. still trying to bounce back from that, but also we've managed to secure several multi-year partnership agreements with our NSOs and local associations. So we're most grateful that, you know, when we get back into activity again, we'll start to see that turn a corner. Yeah, I suppose just relevant sector updates. Obviously, our previous, or our CEO up until about the 20th, has obviously said ka kite anō to us, a big loss. Obviously put a lot of time and energy into his staff team, but we're most grateful for what he's offered. But part and parcel of his mahi to before he disappears is to work with the board on that strategic plan. So so that's a big item for us. We talked about regional facilities before. Look, I think I just want to acknowledge the mahi, and in particular the trust that the council does have in the work that we do around the investment decision-making process. The process is designed to ensure that we've got a transparent way of determining what our priorities look like, but most importantly, whether or not those projects that are submitted are best for our community and also for the investment or potential investment that's being made. I think the improvements that we've made since that plan's been in place is there's a lot more coordinated efforts with involving the national sporting organisation, the local association, and council, as well as ourselves around the table. And just touching on Councillor Barrett's point around you know, at what stage of the process do other groups come into the mixer. I think it's really important that these projects often can provide opportunities for codes that we're unaware of to sort of come out of the woodwork. And I think from its genesis, we want to make sure that we've got a way that enables those conversations to be had. Whatever comes out the other end, that relies on those partnerships to blossom and to grow. So, yeah, it's we're most grateful. And then coming up, we've got our workplace challenge. So, yeah, thank you all for putting your hands up for that one. I think it's going to be an inter-elected member challenge. And just more recently, we had the bubble bingo. So that was really in response to, or the team's response to supporting our residents during a period where formalised activity wasn't too promising. So great numbers, and we'll talk to that in our August report. That concludes my presentation. Julie's happy to answer all your tricky questions.
Thanks, Brad. So I just got a couple of questions and then I'll hand it over to some others. So just looking at your membership numbers on page 80, so Hockey Manawatu numbers have really strengthened. Do you think that that was as a result of that big tournament that we had, the international tournament? They've gone up to over 5,684.
Yeah, look, I don't think it can be based on one event. I think there's a concerted effort through the GM at the time and his team to identify ways, one, to engage with particular communities, and they were fortunate that they put in place programs through to Manawa to attract, I guess, participants or non-traditional participants to the game. So as a result of that, those engagement activities have either stimulated membership or participation. So there's probably a mixed approach to that increase, but I certainly believe that the work of Neil has helped with those increases.
And the second question's around events. So is there any major events that we've lost that we won't get back again, do you think?
No, I've got the spreadsheet. No, we've been, that this last wee period, and I suppose even through the lockdowns, the likes of basketball, volleyball. We were in regular communications with the NSOs to try and get to the point where we were committed to have that event, but to have it here safely. And it got to the nth degree where we had to pull pin. That's why we focused on the multi-year partnership agreements to ensure that they knew that we still wanted them to come back and that we had the support in the city to welcome them back with open arms.
Great. Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, Brad. Just a couple of questions. One is just around the 3 priority suburbs. You've done some good work, I think, in Roslyn and some early work, I think, in Awapuni. What are the next steps for that?
Yeah, to be honest, there's still some pursuits within Awapuni that we want to work with existing providers within those suburbs. I think if we look at Roslyn, that's why it's worked really well. If it relies on us to go in, what we need to make sure is that there's a succession plan. Otherwise, we potentially come and go depending on if we get funded. If we work with groups that already exist, that have long-term relationships, then it's easy for us to have the conversation around how can we support that community and promote physical activity in the pursuit of well-being. So there's still a lot more work to do within Awapuni, and likewise the revised contract area will likely give us a bit more freedom, so it may include a suburb or it may include a particular pocket. But that doesn't stop there. It doesn't stop our approach. So our work continues.
Great. So the next step for expansion is not necessarily a suburb, but might be a more localised area.
Yes. Yep.
Great.
Yep.
Thank you. And I probably a little bit more narrative just around the healthy active learning. You've got 6 schools involved there. What's the sustainability looking like in that, in terms of the programs becoming kind of BAU and just part of a formed habit?
Yeah, sure. That's there's a lot more work or involvement with Sport NZ on that one. The approach itself is potentially not new. It's been similar approaches have been rolled out in schools in the past, and I think they've taken key learnings from those previous or historical experiences to say, what does this look like long term within these schools? Excuse me. So we're expecting to see that if the effort is put into teaching staff, then again we're looking at succession planning. If it relies on the individuals to be working from an organisation in the schools, if funding disappears, those individuals disappear, and so does the long-term impact. So working with the teachers, building up teacher development, professional development, ensures that worst case scenario, if we move, we've got that within the school. From a financial perspective, I'd like to think that Sport NZ will see the value and the impact of that work after 2 to 3 years, and will continue to fund into that area. As I say, their strategic plan, 12-year plan, is a focus on tamariki and rangatahi.
Great, thanks. And just in terms of, are there any steps in terms of audit of the programs in the schools to make sure that we're on track?
Yeah, there is. There's an evaluation group or panel from Sport NZ that reviews all the information that not only our region but nationally, and so it all goes into a melting pot to figure out and justify whether or not the approach is working.
Great, thank you. Very reassuring. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The Mayor.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Brad. I just see a couple of questions. Page 67, which is the officer's report, and it just sort of outlines around the cycling active transport program. I see NZTA withdrawing their funding. Another one. And it's disappointing, because I note on page 2 of your report, 70 of ours, that the numbers are, approaching 500 students received Why are NCTA pulling out of such
Yeah,
a
it
successful
was,
program?
there was a mixed rationale based on the previous 3-year investment because it came through what they call a trance fund, and trance was ACC. So it was a sort of co-joined approach to increasing cycle instruction to decrease cycle injuries or injuries on the other side. I think there are still pockets of funding from Heiwaka Kotahi, but it's captured through your active transport.
Oh, so has the funding switched to us? Okay. Couple of other questions. The multi-sport holiday program looks like it was quite successful.
Yep. I'm not sure if you recall that first started off, I think it was, rugby might have led it, or cricket might have led it. So there's been iterations, I think the third, and the approach there was really about supporting kids into physical activity where it was remove them away from the device. A lot of hard work for the coaches and those support staff, but the value that they've got out of it, the codes have got out of it, and also the kids have got out of it, it's likely going to continue.
Great. And just on the next page, page 77, it's around sports partnerships, and it seems that the governance support is a biggie. I look at all those organisations who represent literally tens of thousands of participants have all needed a bit of a hand at some stage.
Yep, and to be fair, it's not unique. We've probably had this conversation year in, year out. As volunteerism changes, so do committees, so do people's times. And I think really what we're trying to say is if you have a good, strong committee, a good, strong board, then it sets you up and it sets the code up well to be able to sort of respond to community need. It's obviously challenging if the energy sits with one person, and so if that's shared and distributed across many, then yeah, we have a strong sector.
Yeah, and recovering from, on page 79, recovering from sort of COVID-19 and sort of the response to that, the Return to Play program, that's been successful?
Yeah, yep. It was really about working together to support the sports, put in place provision to make sure that, sport could resume safely. But also that we had the checks and balances in place to I guess manage what was still relatively uncertain times. Now that we've moved from the 4 levels to the traffic light system, it provides a bit more certainty again. These codes have planned for the worst case scenario. So if we were to end up in red, then they've got those plans in place to still deliver in some cases.
Yeah, and just with the chair's question around club membership, and I can recall your former leader telling us in 2018 that traditional sport was dying, and I mean, I'm being a traditionalist myself, it's quite interesting to see the uplift in some of these memberships. Some of these sports have really, increased their numbers. You're 11,000 up on what you were 2 years ago. What's brought that on?
Yeah, look, I think we've for User Regional Sport Facility Plan, what we took from that was an inventory stock take of assets, but what we struggled to sometimes capture from codes was the demand aspect. And so we were at a point in time, numbers may not have reflected the true nature of membership and or participation. Now when we look at membership and participation, they're not one and the same. So what we might start to see is a better reflection of who's taking part in what, and the sport readiness tool that this council, we've got that in place now as part of the facility plan review. So it's, yeah, those figures were back in 2020. There was some anticipated drops because of COVID. So we're still, we'll wait to see what comes out of the wash in the next month or so.
And the you know, the sport fund that you administer, and it's great that you've got council officers and CEDA in there. You sort of made a statement here that it decreased the potential of double dipping. Is that really happening though?
I think over time it's improved.
Okay.
Yep, and I think certainly from that funding and support policy, that's sort of cements the position that most parties are aware of, external parties.
Yeah, okay. And just my final question, just around the regional sports facility plan, and that's probably a big one for us because it sort of helps us guide our investment decision making. There's quite a few things on that list, which is a bit concerning. But the big things. What are the things you think will get across the line? I mean, obviously, there's a bit of work going on to go with aquatics and maybe covered tennis, netball, blah blah blah. But where do you think would be the first cab off the rank?
Look, I think what we try and identify through that plan is what current demand looks like, but obviously using trend information to look at future demand. And what you've just highlighted before is that there's anticipated ebbs and flows with some sport, traditional sport, but I think what we're trying to do for the gym sports case is that they've got significant participation in membership. What we need to be able to understand through the next stages, well, if via a new facility, what will that look like? How will that grow if that is in place? And so by assessing at the initial stages would give this council and others an idea on whether or not the project is worth investing in capital-wise, but also from an operational long-term perspective.
Yeah, and do other councils participate in that like we do?
Yes, they do. Yep. So we've got Rangitikei, who are her signatories, with Manawatu District Council and Horowhenua District Council. The other three, one has its own plan but has sat outside of that decision-making process. That review is coming up within this calendar year, and so there is potential. We've also completed an evaluation or a review of how well it's worked, and so from that we're going to use the information to help guide what an iteration of the plan might look like, which would certainly, I think, benefit this council and others.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Right, finally, Councillor Butt. You've been waiting a long time.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Brad, for this report. Almost the same kind of question as Madam Chair asked, but in an opposite sense. I can see that although the membership for Central Squash seems like consistent for the last few years, but if you consider the last 10 years, there is a big drop. Can you tell us what are the reasons for this big drop? It seems like it has, dropped since me and Grant has stopped playing squash.
I haven't stopped.
Yeah, look, I think what we would tend to do is look back the last 3 to 4, 5 years and determine from there whether or not there's the drop is consistent. I mean, as you highlighted, it was a rather significant drop from 2014. I'm not suggesting that the code had some creative accountancy within its membership count, but I think what we've tried to do is examine the difference between membership and participation. And so in 2014, that could have been all participation opportunities. Now that could be working with a school to deliver a participation opportunity for children within that school. Will at some the funding model used to be based on how many kids could be attracted to the sport. Now what we're doing is we're examining that type of information in more detail to provide an accurate and evidence-based understanding of how that sport or our sports are delivering. That shouldn't be a negative for the sport either, because in some ways they may not have been accounting for activities or events that they've run. They've only been fixated on the membership number. So that's probably why you will see those differentials. I'd like to expect that the next iteration of information using the sport readiness tool will improve this with some certainty.
Great, thank you. That was helpful. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Brad and Julie. All the questions have been asked and answered. So I'd like to move that the committee received the memorandum titled Progress Report, Sport Manawatu 6-monthly report, 1st of July to 31st of December 2021, to the City Council, presented to the Play, Rec and Sport Committee on the 27th of April, seconded by Councillor Meehan. Can't see you, but I'm sure you put your hand up. And we'll now look to vote on that with everyone raising their hands. Great, you got your hands up. Thanks everyone, trying to put a little bit of laughter into the meeting. Right, we're now moving to the work schedule, which is on page 107, and I will hand over to Sarah, the Chief Infrastructure Officer, because she would love to have a word.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Chair. So the committee work schedule has moved out the things that have been reported in this meeting. That leaves us with an update for the next update on engagement with the gym sports, presented to be alongside the next stage, the implementation, the play policy implementation monitoring report, and a couple of other actions that have come out over the last year, which is the review of the regional sports facility plan and a feasibility assessment for a covered artificial bowling green, which was raised by submitters, I think, on the annual plan last year, or LTP last year.
So is there any comments on the work schedule? No? So look to move it by Councillor Beattie, seconded by Councillor Hancock. No comments on that. We'll look to vote. All those in favour? Great, we're done and dusted. Thanks, everybody. So what time are we back, Councillor Beattie? We're back at 3 o'clock, everyone. You got 12 minutes. 12-minute break.